One question that I keep asking is how is all this immigration good for the environment? Because when you look at the main cause of environmental destruction and carbon emissions, the main cause is human population growth. And at least here in Canada, or basically any other country in the Western world, the main cause, or actually pretty much the only cause of population growth, is immigration. Like, I think something like 97% of Canada's population growth comes from immigration. Like, it's ridiculous. So, like, my question is, okay, if our governments are serious about helping the environment, why are they supporting all this immigration? Like, shouldn't we be embracing population decline? Like, shouldn't we be following the model of Japan and just showing how a country can still be relatively prosperous, relatively stable, and maintain a relatively high standard of living while still undergoing population decline? Now, some people would say, oh, Japan's GDP per capita is lagging. It's like, okay, it's not super high, but I think it's still higher than like Italy or Spain, or in the same neighborhood as those countries. And I'm pretty sure Japan also has way fewer problems with unemployment than those countries. And it also has way fewer problems with homelessness than like pretty much any Western country. So I would say as a whole, the Japanese are doing all right. The only issue is, oh, they probably don't have as many super rich people as we do. And they probably don't have as many like what we would consider upper middle class as we do either. But I'm sure they have a lot of people who live comfortable middle class lifestyles. And it's like, hey, if that's the sacrifice we need to make for the environment, so be it. Like, I mean, if that's the cost of living in a society with population decline, so be it. Now, obviously, we can't have population decline forever. Like, I don't want to have a children of men scenario where the human race goes extinct, or where, white people or Western civilization or Japanese civilization or any of the main, like, civilizations goes extinct. But at the same time, like, if we're serious about saving the environment, yes, the human population probably does need to go down somewhat. I don't know to win. Like, there's a temptation on the right to always want to like reset things to a certain specific era, whether it be before World War II or like the 1950s or whatever. But I don't know. Like, is the answer to simply try to reset the human population to what it was back then? I don't know. Maybe. But either way, like, I think this idea that immigration is good for the environment, like, how could you make that argument? Like, number one, a lot of forests are cut down to build housing for all these immigrants, like all the McSprawl suburbia popping up in Markham and Brampton and other Toronto suburbs, for instance. And also there's just the added carbon emissions, because the carbon emissions per capita of all these immigrants would be a lot lower if they had stayed in their home countries. Like, that's just an obvious fact. Like, if you look at the average carbon emissions per capita of a person in India versus in Canada, it's not even comparable. The only countries where their carbon emissions would be on par or higher than ours would be the Persian Gulf oil-rich countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and Kazakhstan randomly is pretty high. But again, like, what percentage? I don't know how many of the immigrants to Canada or other Western countries are from those countries specifically. Probably not a huge amount. So yeah, I mean, the vast majority are increasing their carbon emissions massively by coming here. Additionally, it's not just lifestyle emissions, it's that immigrants have very high carbon emissions in one respect, which is that they often fly back and forth between their new adopted country and their home country. And like, Toronto to Delhi, that's a pretty long flight, Like, that's some serious carbon emissions right there, like flying back and forth between Canada and India constantly. So yeah, I mean, and again, yeah, yes, I fly too. I'm not saying I don't. I mean, I've never been to somewhere as far as India, but yes, I do fly quite a bit. And I think this is a good thing to hold their feet to the fire on. Like, why, if stopping global warming is actually so important, why don't they put that as their number one priority? Why do they prioritize immigration and so-called social justice ahead of it? Like, if we really are facing a global climate catastrophe, which I believe we are, then why are they not putting this as their top priority? Like, again, like, I mean, I mean, if you think about it, like if it's actually true that the world is facing a situation where the climate is getting worse and worse and it's going to cause untold misery, like heat waves, forest fires, hurricanes, and just like crop failure and death on a massive scale, and just not just death but misery. Like a lot of people won't die from climate change, but their lives will be made a lot worse. Frankly, that's already happening to a lot of people, like in areas like the Pacific Northwest that have to deal with these heat waves and forest fires on a scale that they didn't have to ever deal with before. I mean, my question is, why shouldn't that be the number one priority? Like, why are you prioritizing immigration ahead of that? Is it because of economic growth, so the rich people and the upper middle class can have their pockets lined further? Is it because of social justice, to stick it to the evil white man? Like, why is it that immigration is being prioritized above the environment? And it is blatantly, because if you suggested to these liberals or leftists that we should reduce immigration for the sake of the environment, well, the first thing they would do is question your sincerity. They'd say, now you care about the environment all of a sudden. Like, that's their go-to argument in those cases. And it's like, okay, in some cases that's accurate. Like if Fox News was to run something about that, like I think Fox News, it was about Taylor Swift's carbon emissions. And they're like, oh, now you care. It's like, I mean, but that's kind of just an ad hominem argument. It doesn't address the core issue. It's like, yeah, but what about Taylor Swift's carbon emissions? Like, that's a legitimate point. Even if the person making it is making it in bad faith, like there still is the question, yeah, what about Taylor Swift's carbon emissions? And yes, what about the carbon emissions and other environmental destructions such as deforestation that is generated by these unprecedented rates of immigration to countries like Canada every year? Like, it's a legitimate point. But me personally, if anybody accuses me of being disingenuous, they can go fuck themselves, because I do care about the environment and I do believe in global warming and I do actually talk about it. Like, I'm not just saying this in bad faith as a fucking talking point. I do actually care about it, and I do actually view it as a big issue. Possibly, as I said, the biggest issue. It very well might be the biggest issue facing humanity as a whole, which also makes it, frankly, the biggest issue facing Western civilization or white people. Like, bigger, frankly, than demographic displacement. Although demographic displacement is still an issue, and I think, you can address both these issues simultaneously. But what you can't do simultaneously is support, like, this endless mass immigration, this endless population growth, but also claim to be an environmentalist. It's just horseshit. Like, I'm sorry, but we do not have the technology right now to have a planet of 10 billion people and live sustainably. We just don't. Maybe a few hundred years in the future, we will find methods of technology so we can do that. Although even then, there will still be sacrifices. Like, land is a non-renewable resource. Even with all the tech in the world, there's still that problem. There's still the issue of deforestation as a result of building housing and settlements for people. Now, granted, and again, there's also the question, like, okay, are we all going to live like in Hong Kong? And again, there's also the question of human quality of life. Like, do we want to live like in Hong Kong? Like, I'm not talking like one of these fucking suburbanites who thinks that like anything denser than like fucking low density suburbia is Hong Kong. Like, those people are completely disingenuous and full of shit and arguing in bad faith. But at the same time, do I want to live in literal Hong Kong density? No, I don't. So yeah, I mean, there's that question. Even if we had greener technology, like, land is a non-renewable resource. I guess we could build artificial islands, but can we really? Is that ever going to be feasible on a large scale? Colonizing space, is that actually going to be feasible? We don't know, okay? So for the time being, for the foreseeable future, I don't see any way we can have a planet with like 10 billion people and live sustainably. Frankly, I don't think we can have a planet with the current number, 8 billion people, and live sustainably. Like, it's just a fact. So yeah, when liberals and leftists support endless immigration, endless population growth, like they say, oh, you're fascist if you complain about overpopulation, which is weird because they used to be complaining about overpopulation, but now they've started saying, oh, you're fascist if you care about that. Well, it's like, there's actually some truth to that argument, because I do think that anybody who believes in the idea that like humans shouldn't just be allowed to just give in to all their base impulses freely. Yeah, there is something fascistic about that desire. And you know what? That's why I'm a fucking third positionist, because I agree with that. Like, I mean, fascism has a point there. Like, humans should not be allowed to just do whatever the fuck they want and give in to all their base impulses. Like, which is something that both libertarians and liberals have a problem with. Like they think that yes, people should just be allowed to like fuck like rabbits and have a billion children each. Like no, they shouldn't. At least let me put it this way. They shouldn't on a mass scale. Like if you're in a country with an extremely low birth rate and you're the one person, you're the one couple that's having 12 kids, I don't really care. But if you're in a country where like everybody's doing this, then yes, that is a problem. Like it's a problem in Africa, it's a problem in Israel. It's a problem among certain immigrant communities to the West, although to be fair, their birth rates tend to go down after a few generations too. The real cause of higher like of population increase here is the immigration itself. Like I think if we ended all immigration tomorrow, even with the existing immigrant populations, our birth rate would still be fairly low, because it seems like they do get assimilated fairly fast in that regard. Like I've even seen lately, like I see, it used to be maybe 10, 15 years ago, I'd see a lot of like black or Muslim families with a ton of kids. I don't see that quite as often as I used to, at least here. But again, that sort of thing is still happening in Muslim and black countries, like in Africa and the Muslim world. But it seems like when they come here, like at least with like the second and third generation immigrants, they seem to have fewer kids compared to back home. But nonetheless, like the immigration itself is a huge cause of this population. Like it is the cause of population increase in Western countries. So yeah, that's my question to liberals and leftists is how can you claim to prioritize the environment while actually in reality prioritizing immigration above the environment?